Hey folks, today we're going to be exploring the case of a girl who vanished in the middle of the night from her bedroom. Her bedmate, her sister, told her an odd story. She was taken by someone wearing a wizard hat. After a staggering 35 years of unsolved cases, the truth about this case was eventually revealed in 2024. On December 3, 1981, Jessica Gutierrez was born in South Carolina. She had two sisters and a brother, making her the youngest member of the family. Jessica's mother, Debbie, was left to raise her four children alone when her parents split soon after Jessica was born. They were all residents of Edmond, a tiny town close to the state capital. Debbie found it challenging to support all of the kids on her alone. However, the family remained rather close-knit despite this. The older children took care of Jessica while Debbie was at work, and in her spare time, Debbie made an effort to think of entertaining activities for the whole group. Their family was enjoying a normal summer day on June 5, 1986. At the age of 4, Jessica was having fun in the backyard with her brothers as their mother completed some household chores. They all ate dinner together that evening, and Debbie then put the kids to bed. Since Jessica was the youngest, she and her mother had shared a bed. However, that particular day, her brother was experiencing ear pain, so Debbie allowed him to share Jessica's bed. Jessica went to bed with her elder sisters as a result. One of the children lay beside Jessica, while the oldest slept in a different bed. Debbie got up at 9 in the morning the following day. Rebecca, who was 6 years old and shared Jessica's bed, went into her mother's room and requested her to prepare cereal for breakfast. Debbie realized something wasn't right as soon as she got out of bed and exited her room. Their dog, who always stayed outside, was running about the house, and the front door, which she typically secured before going to bed, was wide open. The protective screen had been taken off of a curtain rod that was lying beneath the back window. Debbie entered the girls' room, but there was no sign of Jessica. Moreover, she saw several documents strewn all over the floor. Rebecca said, "She's gone," in response to her older kids' question about where their sibling was. She was taken by a bearded man wearing a magic hat. The mother went in search of Jessica, mistaking her 6-year-old daughter for a joke. Although her kid wasn't present, she assumed that perhaps she had gone outside to play in the garden. Debbie quickly came to the conclusion that Jessica was not in the house after searching the entire space in the hopes that Jessica was simply playing hide and seek. With that, the mother hurried back to the girls' room and started pressuring Rebecca to reveal her sister's location. Debbie became irritated with the girl as she continued to say the same thing about the man wearing the magic hat. She started yelling, demanding to know why, if her younger sister was being taken from the house, Rebecca hadn't cried out for aid. It was then that Rebecca revealed further specifics about what had transpired. She claimed that when she awoke in the middle of the night, a bearded man wearing a wizard hat was standing next to their bed. Jessica was still sleeping when he gently scooped her up and took her out of the room. At the age of 6, Rebecca was not entirely cognizant of what was going on. She thought it was simply a strange dream, so she covered her head with a blanket out of fear. She slept that way for a time before falling asleep and forgot to tell her mother what had happened in the morning. Debbie called the police right away, realizing that Rebecca was probably speaking the truth. After conducting a thorough check of the entire residence, the officers concluded that it is possible that she was taken. The living room window was most likely the point of entry for the perpetrator, who took down the security screen. They took a closer look and found a fingerprint on the outside of the glass, which they then sent to specialists. The officers discovered many cigarette butts and a pack of cigarettes next to the glass. Investigators put a recording device on Debbie's phone, realizing they were probably dealing with a kidnapping. This was done in case the abductor called and demanded to be paid a ransom. Rebecca related the same tale about the man wearing a wizard hat to the police after they heard her statement. This time, she said, he had approached their bed without plugging on the nightlight or the fan. The girl's description didn't aid the investigators because she hadn't seen the kidnapper's face. Debbie was the center of attention as they took her to the station and asked her to give a detailed account of everything that had happened the day before. She indicated during the chat that she believed she knew who might have abducted her kid. She had broken up with a man she had been dating for a few months just a few days prior. Debbie claimed that he was frequently intoxicated and exhibited strong, hostile, and domineering behavior. Debbie suspected the father may have intended to steal her daughter as retaliation for her decision to stop their relationship, as he wasn't satisfied with her decision. When she called him from the police station, he said he had nothing to do with Jessica going missing. After deciding to look into him more, the police discovered no evidence connecting him to the incident. They looked into Jessica's father as well, but he had moved out of state a long time ago, so it was impossible for him to have kidnapped his daughter. Experts checked the FBI database using the fingerprints discovered on the window, but they did not find any matches. After deciding to concentrate their efforts, the police started scouring the vicinity of Jessica's home. It was on the outskirts, surrounded by miles and miles of unending farmland. Police looked in all possible locations for Jessica, including forests, rivers, streams, and abandoned buildings. The FBI became involved in the inquiry the following day. However, they were unable to locate the missing girl. Officers began handing out pamphlets not just in the surrounding communities, but all across the state. To get a better aerial view of the area, the sheriff also dispatched an aircraft. Debbie was restless during the few days that the search went on. She was too busy taking care of her 3 kids to go out and look for her daughter. She rarely had conversations with the police. They would only get in touch with her directly. Debbie made the decision to give the sheriff's office a call on Saturday, 2 days after Jessica vanished, to inquire about if the search would be extended for the weekend. The conversation became extremely tense as she was naturally beyond herself with sadness. Debbie claimed that the sheriff was careless and uninterested in locating Jessica. In response, the sheriff said he had spent the entire night looking for her daughter and threatened to cancel his team and forget about the case if she continued to accuse him. Debbie preserved this recording because her phone was still recording everything. The woman was losing more and more hope that Jessica would still be alive every day since she thought the police were not doing enough to locate her daughter. This continued for a few months until the case took an unexpected turn. Slew of crimes confronted the police 10 weeks after Jessica vanished. After a local man broke into someone's home, the owner scared him away with a firearm. Then, after robbing a van and driving to North Carolina, this man attacked a sleeping woman inside her house. The man was taken into custody shortly after the incident, and his fingerprints were added to the database. When they arrived, detectives found a complete match. His prints matched those found on Jessica's home window. Debbie quickly informed the police that the man was Thomas McDowell, 27. As soon as she knew of this, she was acquainted with this individual. She had hired Thomas to do some maintenance on their property a few months prior to Jessica going missing. She had met Thomas through relatives. He'd spent 2 days at her place, building a shed and fixing the awning over the porch. Thomas also had a beard and wore a big cowboy hat every day, which was an interesting tidbit. This gave rise to the theory that Rebecca, who had just a fleeting glimpse of her kidnapper in the shadows, would have confused this headpiece for a wizard's cap such to ones she had seen in cartoons. However, the investigators faced one very significant issue. They decided that this evidence was not enough to pursue charges even though the fingerprints matched. Jessica's body was still missing, so they couldn't be positive she wasn't alive. There may be another reason why Thomas's fingerprints were on the window that had nothing to do with the kidnapping. He spent 2 days working on Debbie's property, so it's possible that's when the fingerprint was left there. That being said, it was quite unlikely. The fingerprint looked fresh, according to forensic experts who examined the property. It hadn't been subjected to outside influences like weather, which could have changed its appearance. Debbie also cleaned this window, where the fingerprint was discovered, on a regular basis. Her kids used to run up to this open window, lean on it with their hands and shout at her when they were playing in the garden and wanted to talk to her. Debbie had to wipe the glass all the time because the kids' hands were nearly always filthy. About half a year prior to the kidnapping, Thomas had been employed on her land. At the time of the inquiry, no additional fingerprints had been discovered there. This meant that the fingerprint would have been erased, indicating that the man could not have left it back then. Debbie provided one more fascinating detail. She recalled that she had unintentionally locked herself out of the house while Thomas was working on her land, leaving the keys inside. She had to climb through the same window as a result, and Thomas witnessed her doing so. However, the police were not persuaded by any of these findings. They persisted in thinking that there was insufficient proof against Thomas to bring legal action. He was found guilty of attacking the homeowner whose house he had broken into in 1987 and received a 10-year prison sentence. The police's refusal to charge him with the kidnapping devastated Debbie, but there was nothing she could do about it. There was another incident that year. Thomas's cellmate informed the authorities that Thomas had admitted to him that he had committed the crime. Thomas claims that he kidnapped a girl in South Carolina and assaulted her in her own bedroom. The victim bit him while he was doing this horrific thing, and he killed her out of wrath. After dismembering the corpses, Thomas carried them to a field and abandoned them there. When investigators in Jessica's case visited him in prison, Thomas didn't even try to refute anything. Nevertheless, he stated that if they provide him complete immunity, he would be prepared to confess. Evidently, the authorities were unable to reach an agreement on such terms, and once more the cops emerged empty-handed. After finding out that Thomas had gotten away with it, his cellmate wrote Debbie a letter explaining what had happened. She was astounded once more that Thomas was able to avoid punishment, but she was powerless to stop it. Debbie chose to look into the matter on her own after becoming dissatisfied with the police's inaction. She once tracked down and examined an abandoned automobile that had formerly belonged to Thomas. She saw threads and fabric fibers there, on one of the seats, matching the color of Jessica's pajamas from the night she vanished. But this was not a lead that the police acted on quickly. They considered it odd that Debbie had discovered fabric fragments in a car without the use of any specialized tools or forensic science expertise. Something else occurred in 1987. Kansas police got in touch with local detectives to inform that they had located a girl who appeared to be Jessica. Her mother took off right away, but her dreams were dashed right away. She knew it wasn't her daughter when she arrived to meet the girl simply by hearing her voice in the hallway. Debbie claimed in multiple interviews over the ensuing years that the police had overlooked the apparent culprit, but her claims produced no real evidence. Jessica's case was highlighted on a well-liked TV show about unsolved murders in 1990. This resulted in another round of suggestions, but regrettably, they were all ineffective. 1 year later, Jessica became the first South Carolina missing kid to have an age-progressed photograph made of them. Detectives thought that after all these years, this innovative and experimental technology, considering it was the early 1990s, would aid in Jessica's identification. Regretfully, the case remained unsolved for a long time in spite of everything. 21 years after Jessica vanished, in 2007, her mother openly accused the local police force of being incompetent once more. This time, she handed the tape of her interview with the sheriff, in which he informed her he could fire his deputies and move on from the case to the press. When they contacted the sheriff, he responded that despite the years, he was still looking into the case. In addition, the sheriff said that he sent even more officers to the inquiry in addition to not sending his guys home following their talk with Debbie. Debbie also bemoaned the fact that despite her best efforts for years, the local prosecutor's office had consistently obstructed her attempts to enlist the support of other agencies in this case. They examined the matter in the same year, 2007, and determined that there was insufficient evidence at the time to bring charges against anyone. The sheriff was fired and sentenced to 12 months in jail in 2014 after being charged with fraud and bribery. The prosecutor resigned and was fined $1,000 after being arrested for hit and run while intoxicated 2 years later. With assistance from the FBI, the new sheriff, Jay Kuhn, restarted the inquiry in 2021, 35 years after Jessica vanished. With 50 agents assigned to the case, all available evidence was reviewed in an effort to find fresh leads. In the end, they found fresh circumstantial evidence connecting Thomas McDowell to the crime, in addition to coming to the conclusion that there is sufficient evidence against him. Following Jessica's abduction, the man radically changed his look, chopping off his long hair and beard and giving up his beloved cowboy hat. According to his relatives and friends, they say he smoked the same brand of cigarettes that were commonly seen close to Jessica's house. Sadly, experts were unable to locate any DNA on these pieces of evidence. This is likely because they have been analyzed previously, perhaps erasing any biological traces. Even though there was reason to be suspicious of Thomas, his fingerprint and the testimony of his old cellmate remained the most important pieces of evidence. Detectives eventually thought they had enough evidence to proceed with a trial, and Thomas was eventually taken into custody in January 2022. Thomas, at 62, steadfastly refused to acknowledge his guilt, and the trial's preparation took several years. Only in January 2024 did Thomas's attorneys try to refute the already existing evidence. They maintained that Thomas had worked on the property when his fingerprint was left on the glass. Rebecca was also a witness that the defense attempted to employ. Recall that Jessica's sister reported seeing a man wearing a wizard hat. Thomas's solicitors attempted to persuade everyone that since cowboy hats and wizard hats are so dissimilar, the girl could not have confused them. But as the prosecution specialists pointed out, the fingerprint was obviously recent. Had it been kept out a few months prior to the kidnapping, the weather would have either erased it or changed it. Previous prisoner also testified during the trial, restating Thomas' 1987 confession. An outsider from another state would not likely be familiar with the specifics of the case, the prosecution argued. Furthermore, Thomas himself stated during those years that he was prepared to confess, but that he just wanted complete immunity, clearly not a possibility. At the conclusion of the trial on February 8, the jury unanimously declared Thomas guilty. He was given a life sentence at the age of 63. Debbie experienced mixed feelings about the case's conclusion because she had been persuaded of her culpability since the beginning of the investigation. Although she was happy that the offender was at last brought to justice, she pointed out that Thomas could have been apprehended 36 years prior. Rather than bringing him to justice, the cops let him live a long life. Debbie was also still in shock that her daughter's remains had never been discovered despite searching for years. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, keep living your best life. Goodbye.